The night the storm came to Cedar Lake, it didn't just tear through the town, it tore through Michael Grant's soul. After losing his wife, the 56-year-old father lived only for his little girl and their loyal dog, Rex. But when lightning split the sky that night, the earth revealed what grief had buried: a box of letters, a forgotten promise, and a woman who might just be the miracle he stopped believing in. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and may God bless everyone watching tonight. The wind off Cedar Lake carried the smell of iron and pine that morning, the kind of cold that made roofs creak and thoughts linger. At the edge of the small town stood a narrow, two-story house with chipped blue paint and windows fogged from the inside, as if the walls themselves were breathing out memories. Michael Grant, 51, stepped out of his old pickup and stared at the house. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered but slightly stooped, as though life had quietly pressed its thumb against his spine. His hair, once black, was now streaked with steel gray. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed a face marked by both grit and gentleness. A face that had once smiled easily but now seemed to ration emotion carefully. He had the hands of a builder, knuckles roughened by decades of machines, but his movements were slow, deliberate, like someone afraid of breaking what little still worked. Michael had once been a mechanical engineer, a man who could fix almost anything except the hollow ache that followed his wife's death. The accident had come on a wet highway 6 months ago. A delivery truck, a blind turn, and a silence that swallowed his world whole. Since then, he had lost his job, his home, and the illusion that life owed him fairness. What he hadn't lost was his daughter, and that, he reminded himself daily, was reason enough to keep breathing. Lily, his 8-year-old, hopped out of the truck holding a box half her size. She was a slim girl with tangled brown hair and bright hazel eyes that somehow managed to look both curious and cautious at once. Her small hands were red from the cold, but she smiled anyway, that brave, gap-toothed grin that only children can manage when the world looks heavier than they are. She wore her mother's old scarf, faded rose-colored wool that carried the faint scent of lavender, the only smell that could still calm Michael's heart. And then there was Rex. The German shepherd leapt from the truck bed with the grace of a soldier and the loyalty of a saint. He was 5 years old, muscular, with a coat that shimmered between black and gold when the sun caught it. His amber eyes seemed to read people better than words could, and he had a habit of standing between Lily and the world, as if fate itself might try again. Michael often joked that Rex was the only one in the family still employed, his full-time job being guardian, therapist, and occasional clown. They stepped inside. The floorboards groaned like tired lungs, but the house was dry, and the faint light through the dusty windows looked almost kind. The living room was sparse: 2 chairs, a sagging sofa, and an old wood stove that coughed out heat reluctantly. Michael set down a box labeled "Kitchen," though he knew it contained mostly memories: a chipped mug Sarah once loved, the frying pan from their first apartment, and a photograph he still couldn't face. He took a deep breath and turned to Lily. "What do you think? Kiddo? Needs a little love, huh?" Lily nodded solemnly. "It's creaky, but it smells like pancakes." Michael laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That's optimism I didn't inherit." Rex wagged his tail, circling the room, sniffing corners like a detective. He barked once, sharp and certain, as if declaring the territory safe. Lily giggled. For a fleeting moment, Michael felt something stir, the ghost of normal. As evening fell, they ate macaroni from paper bowls, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The light bulb above flickered, humming with tired electricity. Outside, the lake whispered against the rocks, steady and cold. When Lily went to bed, Rex followed, curling at the foot of her mattress. Michael sat alone by the window, watching the reflection of the street lamp flicker across the glass. He reached for the shoebox on the counter, the one labeled only "her letters." He hadn't opened them since Sarah's funeral. Each envelope inside bore her handwriting, careful, looping, alive. He ran his thumb over the ink as if warmth could seep through time. He could still hear her voice sometimes, especially in that hour between exhaustion and sleep, the one that sounded almost real enough to believe. "You'll figure it out, Mike," she used to say. "You always do." He closed the box gently, returning it to the counter. His eyes burned, and he whispered into the stillness, "Not this time, Sarah." Outside, Rex lifted his head, ears twitching toward the porch. He growled softly. Michael frowned, standing. Through the frost-blurred window, he saw something, A faint light at the edge of the yard, near the fence. It flickered once, then vanished. He stepped closer, heart ticking faster. Nothing moved. Just the wind. Just the empty house next door that hadn't been occupied in years. Probably the wind, he muttered. Rex, however, didn't stop staring at the darkness. His fur bristled, low growl humming like a warning. Michael turned off the lamp, the house falling into quiet shadow. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening. He stood there a long moment, watching the dark yard, before whispering, "Welcome home, huh?" But outside, somewhere near the fence, something metallic clinked softly, once, twice, as if the night itself had teeth. Morning returned to Cedar Lake pale and silver, the kind of light that made the frost shimmer like spilled salt across rooftops. Michael hadn't slept well. The strange sound near the fence lingered in his thoughts, though he told himself it was just a loose gutter or a raccoon nosing through leaves. Rex had kept his post by the door until dawn, eyes fixed on the yard like a sentry sworn to a private war. When the kettle finally whistled, the steam curling through the kitchen felt almost like relief. Michael was halfway through his second cup of coffee when Lily burst in, jacket half-zipped, hair wild from sleep. "Dad! School bus!" she shouted, stuffing books into her backpack. Her laughter filled the room like birdsong, brief but enough to scatter the gloom. He smiled, tightening the strap on her pack, then crouched to meet her eyes. "Hey, brave one, remember, I'll be here when you get back." She nodded solemnly before dashing out, Rex trotting beside her until she disappeared around the corner. After she left, the house exhaled into quiet. Michael stared out the window, watching a few locals walking dogs or scraping frost from car windshields. He had started doing odd repair jobs around town, fence hinges, heater vents, the kind of work that paid just enough to keep the lights on. That morning, though, he had something heavier on his mind, the letters from Sarah. They sat in the same shoebox, unopened. He told himself he'd read them someday when it hurt less, though part of him feared that day might never come. By noon, he headed to the hardware store for sandpaper and nails. The wind had picked up near the docks, carrying a bite of lake water and the faint clang of sailboats knocking against their moorings. He parked near the boardwalk, coat collar up against the cold, Rex close behind. Then he heard it, a startled cry, the sharp sound of a boot slipping. He turned in time to see a woman fall from the edge of the pier, the wooden plank cracking beneath her heel. Without thinking, Michael dropped his tools and ran. Rex barked once, fierce and commanding. The woman flailed, hitting the icy water hard. Michael jumped in after her, the lake swallowing them in a shock of freezing silence. He caught her arm and pulled, kicking furiously until Rex's bark guided him toward the dock ladder. They clambered up, dripping, breathless. The woman coughed violently, clutching her shawl. "Thank God!" she gasped. "That water is murder in November." She was perhaps mid-40s, tall and willowy, with auburn hair matted to her cheeks. Her face was angular, yet kind, marked by the fine lines of someone who had lived fully but learned restraint. Her clothes, long gray coat, black gloves, and a silk scarf now ruined by lake water, spoke of quiet sophistication rather than vanity. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at him with eyes the color of weathered amber, steady, searching, grateful. "Grace Turner," she said between coughs, offering a shaking hand. "You must be the man who moved into the old Whitmore place." Michael nodded, wiping his brow. "Michael Grant, and this is Rex. He insists on introductions." Rex wagged his tail once, sniffed Grace's hand, then gave a soft, approving whine. She laughed weakly. "Well, he's a better judge of people than I am. I slipped chasing after a wind-up clock. It's antique, belonged to my father. He was a naval engineer. The mechanism's been broken for years." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a soaked brass pocket watch. Its casing was dented, its face spider-webbed with cracks. Michael studied it, eyes narrowing. Balance wheels warped, mainspring probably shot. Still, it's beautiful. Grace tilted her head. "You know clocks?" "Machines, geez," he said simply. "Clocks, engines, hearts, they all break the same way. Wear, neglect, and time." Her expression softened. "Then perhaps you could fix it. My shop's down on Main, Turner's Restorations. You'd be doing me a kindness." He hesitated, water dripping from his sleeve. He hadn't fixed anything delicate in years, not since Sarah's accident. The thought of handling something so fragile stirred an ache he wasn't ready for. But Grace was smiling, not in pity but in quiet respect, as if she already understood he needed something to mend beyond metal. "All right," he said finally. "I'll take a look." That afternoon he followed her to her store, a narrow corner shop squeezed between a florist and a bakery. The sign above the door was hand-painted and a little faded. Inside, shelves bowed beneath the weight of forgotten things: gramophones, porcelain dolls, rusted lanterns. The air smelled faintly of linseed oil and dust, with undertones of cinnamon from the bakery next door. Grace worked the register with practiced grace. "My father taught me that every broken thing has a story," she said, setting the clock on a workbench. "Sometimes people bring me pieces they can't bear to throw away. I try to give them another chance." Michael looked around the shop, his fingers trailing over brass handles and chipped wood. "I used to believe that too," he murmured. She glanced at him but didn't press. Instead, she offered a towel and a cup of hot tea. Her hands were elegant but calloused, the kind of hands that knew tools as well as tenderness. "You look like a man who's lost something," she said softly, not as a question but as an observation. Michael didn't reply. He didn't have to. The quiet between them was gentle, not heavy. Rex lay by the counter, tail tapping the floor. When he finally began working on the clock, he found himself absorbed in its intricacy. Each gear and spring felt like a puzzle, whispering patience. Grace watched quietly, occasionally tidying shelves or lighting a lamp. Hours passed unnoticed until the sun leaned westward through the window. "There," Michael said at last, setting down his screwdriver. The watch ticked faintly, hesitant but alive. Grace's eyes widened, her lips parting into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "You did it," she breathed. "It's still fragile," he warned. "Needs time to settle." "Don't we all?" she replied, and the warmth in her voice disarmed him completely. He stayed longer than he meant to. Grace told stories about her late father, a stern but generous man who'd restored lighthouses along the coast. She'd inherited both his workshop and his stubbornness, she said with a grin. Michael found himself laughing, a sound he hadn't trusted in months. When the clock finally struck 6, he realized it was time to fetch Lily. Grace walked him to the door, the street now washed in amber dusk. "Bring Lily sometime," she said. "I keep sweets behind the counter for brave girls. And Rex, of course, is welcome any time." Michael smiled, but there was hesitation behind it. "We'll see." He walked back to his truck, the repaired clock ticking softly in his pocket, each beat like a reminder that something broken could still move forward. Rex trotted beside him, pausing once to glance back at the shop. Inside, Grace stood by the window, watching them go, her expression unreadable but warm. When they reached home, Lily ran to meet him at the gate, arms full of a school art project. "Look, Daddy, it's us, me, you, and Rex." She held up a paper cutout of 3 stick figures, holding hands beneath a crooked yellow sun. Michael felt something shift inside him, a quiet crack in the wall he'd built. That night, as Lily slept and Rex dozed by the hearth, Michael turned the brass watch over in his hand. It ticked faintly, stubbornly, against his palm. He thought of Grace's words, of the way her eyes had met his when the clock first came back to life. Outside, the wind swept along Cedar Lake again, brushing against the fence. This time, when Rex's ears perked up, Michael didn't move. He just listened, and somewhere between the ticking watch and the rustling trees, he could have sworn he heard another sound, soft footsteps retreating down the gravel road, too light to belong to a stranger. The storm came without mercy, rolling across Cedar Lake like a living thing. Wind howled against rooftops, rain slashed sideways, and the old trees bent until they looked like men bowing in pain. Power lines snapped like dry twigs, plunging the town into a restless darkness, lit only by the flash of lightning that carved silver veins through the sky. Inside the house on Cedar Street, Michael stood at the window, watching the trees thrash like wild beasts. His face was lit by the soft orange flicker of a lantern. Rex paced near the door, growling at every gust that rattled the shutters. "Easy, boy," Michael murmured, tightening his coat. "It's just wind." But it wasn't just wind. Something about this storm felt different, charged, deliberate, as if the world itself was trying to drag buried things back into the open. Lily had gone to an afternoon art club at the school, a short walk that had stretched longer as the rain arrived early. She was supposed to call before walking home. She hadn't. Michael checked his phone again. No signal. He grabbed his flashlight, pulling on boots that still carried the mud of old winters. "Stay," he ordered Rex, but the dog barked, refusing to obey. Another flash of lightning cracked across the lake, and Michael sighed. Fine, let's go. The wind hit him like a wall the moment they stepped outside. Rain turned to sleet, pelting his face. The narrow street that usually hummed with quiet life was now deserted, the lamps along the dock flickering, the world painted in shades of gray and chaos. They made it halfway to the school before Michael spotted the small pink mitten lying near a puddle. His stomach dropped. Lily's. He knelt, heart hammering, scanning the road for footprints. There, faint impressions heading toward the park near the lake. "Lily!" he shouted into the storm. His voice was swallowed whole. Rex barked once and charged ahead, following the scent, his muscles tense, tail straight like an arrow. The park was nearly unrecognizable, branches torn from trees, swings twisting like ghosts in the wind. Lightning flashed again, revealing a small figure by the bench near the lake's edge. Michael's breath caught, Lily clutching her sketchbook to her chest, her hair plastered to her forehead. He ran, slipping in the mud, and scooped her into his arms. "Daddy," she sobbed. "The bridge was gone. I couldn't find the way." He held her tight. "You're safe. You're safe now." Rex circled them, barking furiously, not at the storm, at something else. His ears pricked toward the grove behind them, where an old oak had fallen across the trail, its roots torn from the ground like the bones of the earth. He growled low, pawing at the soil near the trunk. Michael frowned, still holding Lily close. "What is it, boy?" Rex barked again, digging now, dirt flying behind him despite the rain. Something metallic glinted between roots as lightning struck again. Michael hesitated, then set Lily down gently. "Stay back, sweetheart." He knelt beside Rex and brushed away the mud. His fingers touched something cold, a rusted iron handle. Together they cleared the soil until a small metal box emerged, edges corroded but intact. He pried it open with his knife. Inside, wrapped in layers of oilskin, were letters, dozens of them, each one written in Sarah's familiar hand. His pulse stopped. Lily gasped. "Mommy's writing." Michael's throat closed. Rain blurred the ink, but he could make out the first line on the top letter. "For Grace, in case I can't keep my promise." Grace. He looked toward the town, where her shop stood somewhere beyond the curtain of rain. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Lightning cracked again, and for a moment it illuminated Rex's eyes, sharp, alert, fixed on something behind them. Michael turned. A figure approached through the rain, coat billowing, lantern swinging. It was Grace. Her hair clung to her face, eyes wide with worry. "Michael! Lily! Are you all right?" He held up the box. "You want to explain this?" She froze. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I didn't know you'd find it tonight." "Find it?" His voice was sharp, half shouted to be heard over the wind. "My wife's letters. Buried in the dirt? Why would they be here? Why are they addressed to you?" Grace's face went pale beneath the lantern light. She looked smaller suddenly, fragile against the fury of the storm. "Because Sarah trusted me," she said softly. "We were friends long before you met her. We met in college, two girls trying to survive grief. She lost her mother. I just lost my brother in a fire. She said you saved her from her loneliness." Grace's eyes glistened. "And she made me promise, if anything ever happened to her, I'd look after you and Lily, quietly, without disrupting your lives. She thought it would hurt less that way." Michael stared, unable to speak. The rain mixed with tears on his face. "You knew all this time?" "I only knew she'd written letters," Grace said. "She gave me one copy and said she'd hide another near the house you'd one day move to. I never expected—" Rex barked, interrupting. Thunder boomed overhead, closer now. Grace stepped forward, reaching for the box. "Please, Michael, let's get inside before—" But Michael pulled back, clutching it protectively. "You should have told me." Her expression broke, pain flashing across it. "And destroy what little peace you had left? You were barely breathing after she died. You think you'd have let me near you if I'd said I was your dead wife's friend?" The truth hit harder than the rain. He remembered that first day at the pier, how Grace had looked at him, not with curiosity, but recognition. A thread of something he hadn't understood then. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, Mommy wanted her to help us?" Michael knelt, taking Lily's face in his hands. I think so, sweetheart. Grace crouched beside them, her voice barely above the wind. Sarah wanted you both to keep living. She wrote about it in those letters, how love wasn't meant to be guarded like ashes, but shared, even if it hurts. For a moment, none of them spoke. The storm raged, but inside that silence was something softer, the sound of forgiveness trying to take shape. Michael finally stood, looking at Grace. "We'll read them together," he said quietly. She nodded, relief trembling in her breath. Rex barked once more, sharp but calmer now, before circling them and lying down beside the fallen oak, as if guarding the secret he'd unearthed. As they turned back toward home, Michael glanced once more at the box in his hands. The storm had begun to ease, the rain thinning into mist. Somewhere across the lake, the first light of dawn flickered faintly, not bright enough to see by, but enough to believe in. And as the wind carried the scent of wet pine and the faint ticking of the repaired clock in his pocket, Michael felt something unexpected. Not peace, not yet, but the fragile outline of it forming. Then, behind them, from where the oak had fallen, came a low creak. Wood shifting, or something else. Michael turned, frowning, but the fog swallowed the sound whole. Rex's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Michael whispered to himself, almost too quietly to hear, "Some things don't stay buried forever." The storm gave one last sigh and went still. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the shape of broken branches, dark puddles, and the uneasy calm that always follows chaos. The air smelled of wet cedar and earth, heavy with the scent of things turned over and revealed. Michael stood on the porch of his house, coffee cooling in his hands, watching a pair of blue jays pick at the damp ground. The box of letters lay inside on the kitchen table, still unopened. He had promised Grace they would read them together, but promises made in the light often trembled in the dark. Lily ran across the yard, her boots splashing through a shallow puddle. She wore her mother's faded scarf again, the rose-colored one, wrapped twice around her small neck. Her laughter, bright and careless, echoed against the quiet neighborhood. Rex chased after her, tail wagging, his fur finally dry and brushed smooth. The dog had become something of a local celebrity since the storm. Everyone in town had heard how he'd dug up a box that changed everything. The hero of Cedar Lake, they called him at the general store. But that morning, even as Michael smiled at the sight of Lily playing, a letter on the porch table gnawed at the back of his mind. It was from the property office, an official notice, stamped and impersonal. The old landlord's family, the Whitakers, wanted to sell the house. They lived 3 counties away, but the letter said plainly, "You have 60 days to vacate or purchase the property." Michael folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket. He didn't have to tell Lily yet. Children deserved at least a few weeks more of sunlight before the clouds rolled in again. Later that day, he drove into town. The hardware store had a help wanted sign, but it was part-time, minimum wage, barely enough to keep food on the table, much less buy a home. He stopped by the diner, nodding to Tom Abernathy, the owner, a short, balding man with a walrus mustache and the kind of kindness that comes in slow doses. Tom had served in the Marines decades ago, a fact he reminded everyone of, usually while pouring coffee. His right hand trembled slightly, an old injury from service in Lebanon, though he called it the world's longest coffee spill. Tom wiped the counter and looked up. "You look like a man carrying too many ghosts, Mike." Michael smiled tiredly. "You could say that." "Well, coffee's on the house," Tom said. "Heard about the storm. You and that dog of yours made the front page of the town paper. Cedar Lake's Guardian. Has a nice ring to it." Michael chuckled. "Rex enjoys the attention more than I do." Tom poured the coffee and leaned in. "Heard the Whitakers are selling? Damn shame. That house has got more heart than half this town." Michael didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. That evening, he visited Grace's shop, the bell above the door chiming gently as he entered. The air smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Grace stood by the counter, her auburn hair pinned loosely, a few strands brushing her cheeks. Her clothes were simple, a navy sweater, rolled sleeves, jeans dusted with sawdust from a restoration project. Yet there was something effortlessly elegant about her, as if she carried a small light that made everything around her look softer. She smiled when she saw him, but her eyes flicked toward the letter in his hand. "Bad news?" He nodded, handing it to her. She read it silently, her brow furrowing. "They can't just do this." "They can," he said quietly, "and they will. It's their property. I've been a renter since the day I came here. I guess the clock's finally out of time." Grace set the letter down. "So, what will you do?" He hesitated. There's a job opening in Detroit. Contract work at an auto plant. Long hours, decent pay. If I can get it, maybe I can send for Lily once I'm settled. Her eyes widened. You'd leave her here? No, he said quickly, then softer. But I might have to. I can't take her into that mess. City's no place for a kid right now. Grace's voice broke just slightly. Michael, she's already lost her mother. Don't make her lose her home, too. He looked away, guilt shadowing his face. You think I don't know that? Rex, lying by the door, lifted his head and gave a low whine, as if echoing her plea. Grace walked to the workbench, running a hand over an old cash register, her father's handwriting still scratched inside the drawer. When my father died, she said, I almost sold this shop. I didn't think I could run it alone, but he used to tell me, Grace, you don't quit what's worth keeping. Maybe this house, your life here, maybe it's worth keeping too. Michael exhaled slowly. I don't have the money. The bank won't even give me a handshake, let alone a loan. Grace turned to him. Then borrow mine. He stared at her. What? I'll put the shop up as collateral. It's old, but it's paid off. You can use the loan to start something here, a workshop, a repair business. You fix everything you touch, Michael. That's your gift. Stop running from it. He shook his head. I can't take your livelihood. You're not taking it, she said firmly. You're giving it purpose. The weight of her words settled between them. The rain had started again outside, soft and steady against the windows. Michael finally whispered, Why would you do this for me? Grace smiled faintly. Because Sarah asked me to help you live, not just survive. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then he nodded once, not in agreement, but in surrender. Over the next weeks, they worked quietly together. Grace handled the paperwork with the local bank, her calm presence somehow cutting through the bureaucracy. Tom and a few neighbors helped clear out an old garage behind the diner, where Michael set up a modest workshop. The first days were rough, a broken radiator here, a tractor engine there, but word spread quickly. Grant's repairs became a small miracle for the town. Rex stayed by his side every day, barking at customers, fetching dropped tools, curling by the door when the work ran late. By spring, the garage smelled of oil, pine, and coffee. Lily spent afternoons there, painting on scrap wood while Michael worked. Sometimes Grace would visit, bringing sandwiches, her laughter bright against the clang of wrenches. Slowly, the edges of Michael's world softened. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, Michael sat outside the shop, Rex at his feet, watching Lily chase fireflies. Grace stood beside him, holding 2 mugs of tea. You built something beautiful, she said quietly. He looked at her, really looked this time, and saw not just the woman who had saved him from drowning in grief, but the woman who had quietly taught him how to breathe again. No, he said, smiling softly. We did. Grace's eyes glimmered in the fading light. So, she said, half teasing, does that mean you're staying? Michael glanced toward the horizon where the lake caught the last amber light of day. For now, he said, maybe longer. Rex gave a low, approving bark, as if sealing the decision. The bell above the diner chimed faintly in the distance, carried by the evening wind. For the first time in years, Michael didn't feel like running. But as night settled and the town's lights blinked on one by one, he looked toward the workshop, toward the half-finished engine sitting on the table. Something about it made his chest tighten, though he couldn't say why. And somewhere far off, a letter from Sarah, still unread, waited in the box, patient as time itself. 3 winters passed, and Cedar Lake learned to breathe again. The storms came and went, roofs were mended, children grew taller, and on most evenings the sound of metal against metal sang softly from the back of the town, from the small repair shop where Michael Grant worked beneath the flickering light of an old bulb. Grant's repairs had become something of a legend. There wasn't an engine, clock, or kettle in 3 counties that hadn't been touched by his steady hands. People said he could fix anything except his own grief, but those who really knew him, Grace, Lily, and Rex, understood he'd been quietly fixing that too. Michael, now 54, looked stronger than he had in years. His beard had filled in silver at the chin, giving his square jaw a rugged dignity. Lines had deepened around his eyes, but so had the light in them. His clothes bore the scent of oil and cedarwood soap, and his hands, rough, scarred, steadfast, spoke of years lived honestly. He had built a life, one bolt and heartbeat at a time. The shop was alive that morning, Lily sat at the workbench, now 11, her brown hair tied up in a messy ponytail. She had her mother's focus and her father's curiosity, a dangerous combination. Her small fingers danced over a tangle of wires and circuit boards. Beside her sat a metal prototype shaped vaguely like a dog's head, its eyes made from repurposed flashlight lenses. "Dad," she said without looking up, "if memory is just a sequence of signals, then loyalty must be a kind of memory too, right?" Michael smiled, tightening a bolt on a generator. "That's philosophy before breakfast, kiddo. You been reading my old science books again?" "Maybe," she grinned. "Or maybe Rex told me." At the sound of his name, Rex lifted his head from the rug near the door. Age had softened him, gray dusting his muzzle, movement slower, but his eyes still burned bright amber. He let out a soft huff, stretching his legs before padding over to nudge Lily's hand, tail wagging with patient devotion. Grace entered then, brushing snow from her coat. She was 48 now, though time had touched her kindly. Her auburn hair, streaked faintly with silver, framed a face that still carried warmth in every line. She wore a long wool coat, gloves tucked into her belt, and a faint scent of cinnamon and varnish, the smell of her antique shop, now thriving again just down the street. "Morning, engineer," she said, kissing Michael's cheek. "And good morning to my favorite inventor." Lily beamed. "The project's almost ready, Miss Grace." "Almost?" Grace teased. "You've been tinkering for 6 months, dear. What are you building? A rocket?" Lily held up the half-finished mechanical dog. "Better, a tribute." Grace's brows arched. "To who?" "To Rex," Lily said proudly. "It's for the National Junior Science Fair. I called it Rex, the Guardian of Light. It can recognize faces, follow commands, and when it senses danger, it growls, just like him." Rex barked once, as if in approval. Grace laughed. "Then I suppose he's your research assistant." Michael wiped his hands. "She coded the behavior all by herself. Don't ask me how. I just fix what she breaks." Later that week, the town gathered in the square for the annual Winter Illumination Festival, the largest event Cedar Lake had seen in years. Lanterns hung from every lamppost, strings of lights stretched across rooftops, and children chased snowflakes beneath the music of fiddles and laughter. At the center of it all stood the new monument, a massive lantern tower built from reclaimed steel and glass, designed to shine over the town like a beacon of hope. Michael, Grace, Lily, and Rex arrived together. The cold painted everyone's breath white, but the air pulsed with warmth, the kind that comes from a community reborn. Mayor Douglas Harper, a broad man in his 60s with a booming laugh and a belly shaped by decades of good pie, took the stage. He was known for his kindness as much as his long-winded speeches. Dressed in a thick wool coat, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold, he grinned at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying over the music. "3 years ago, this town nearly lost its heart, but tonight, we prove that light can always find its way home." He gestured toward the lantern tower. "This beacon was designed by our very own young inventor, Lily Grant." Applause erupted. Lily froze for half a second, cheeks reddening, then stepped shyly forward. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier. "This light isn't just for decoration," she said. "It runs on recycled energy, and it's programmed to dim at midnight so the stars can breathe again." She smiled down at Rex. "It's inspired by my dog. He never gives up, even in the dark." Rex wagged his tail, earning laughter and cheers. Grace squeezed Michael's hand, whispering, "You should be proud." "I am," he murmured, but his eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on Grace. When the mayor finished his speech, he nodded toward Lily. "Shall we light the lantern?" She pressed the button on her handheld controller. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the tower flared to life, flooding the square with golden light that rippled across the snow. The crowd gasped as reflections danced along the lake, and in that glow, every face seemed softer, every scar gentler. Michael turned to Grace. "You remember what Sarah wrote? That love's meant to be shared?" Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "I do." He reached into his coat pocket. His fingers brushed the small velvet box he'd been carrying for months, the same one that had once belonged to Sarah's mother. It was simple, the metal worn, but still beautiful. He took a slow breath. "Grace Turner," he said, loud enough. "For those nearest to hear, you kept a promise you never had to keep. You gave Lily a home, and you gave me back my life. I can't fix every broken thing in this world, But if you let me, I'll spend the rest of mine taking care of you." The crowd hushed. Even the snow seemed to pause. Grace covered her mouth, eyes wide, trembling. For a moment, she couldn't speak, only nodded through tears. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times, yes. Applause broke like thunder. Rex barked 3 times, sharp, proud, certain, and the crowd laughed, calling it the dog's approval. Lily threw her arms around them both, laughing and crying all at once. The mayor wiped his eyes behind his glasses, pretending it was the wind. As the celebration continued, Michael looked up at the glowing tower. Its light flickered softly, reflected in Grace's eyes and Lily's smile. For the first time in a long time, he didn't think of loss. He thought of endurance, of the way things rebuild themselves when love refuses to let them die. Later, as the music faded and people drifted home, Michael, Grace, Lily, and Rex stood at the edge of the street. The lantern tower's light shimmered over the snow, forming halos around their shadows. Rex leaned against Michael's leg, tail thumping softly. Michael whispered, almost to himself, "Guess we finally found our light, huh, boy?" Rex gave a quiet huff, eyes half closed, the loyal echo of every promise ever kept. And beneath that steady glow on Cedar Street, a family stood, imperfect, mended, enduring, proof that even in the darkest corners of grief, love can still build something bright enough to guide the way home. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles wrapped in light. He sends them quietly, through a loyal dog who never gives up, a child's laughter in the cold, or a stranger's kindness that mends a broken heart. Michael thought he had lost everything, but in truth, God was never gone. He was simply waiting for the right moment to remind him that love never dies. It just changes form. If you've ever faced loss, loneliness, or hopeless nights, remember this. Miracles don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper. And maybe, just maybe, tonight's whisper is meant for you. May God bless you, your family, and all the hearts still searching for light. If this story touched you, please share it. Leave a comment about your own story of faith, and subscribe. So, together we can keep the light of hope burning in this world.